Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Eddie Aruza. Just a little more than a week until Election Day on April 2nd, and Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle continue battling it out to become Chicago's next mayor. Their latest face-off took place last night here at WTTW.
And she's a person who is an insider, who has been appointed to the government positions that she's held. And I think that's quite different. And I think
Are you an insider, Lori Lightfoot?
Well, I'm the insider who had the courage to run against Rahm Emanuel. I didn't stand idly by and wait till the Goliath was slain.
The candidates also sparred over police reform, bringing change to City Hall, and Chance the Rapper. 20th Ward Alderman Willie Cochran joins the long list of disgraced city officials as he pleads guilty to a federal charge of wire fraud.
Through their actions, they have destroyed my foundation for morality, for values, for trust.
Meanwhile, child sex abuse by Catholic clergy in Illinois even worse than reported so far. In Springfield, a new bill would raise the state gasoline tax 19 cents a gallon for roads and bridges. Increasing troubles for Chicago-based Boeing as the Department of Justice now using a grand jury to investigate 737 MAX jets. And in sports,
makes it 3-1 Philadelphia.
The Blackhawks lose to the Flyers, but they still have a slim shot at the playoffs.
Joining us tonight are Steve Daniels of Crain's Chicago Business, Heather Sharon of the Daily Line, Alden Laurie of WBEZ 91.5 FM on your dial, and Brandon Pope of WCIU TV. Great to have all of you here. Thanks for being here tonight. Heather Sharon, I would imagine that you watched our forum here last night. Lori Lightfoot was seated in that very seat that you are in tonight. What did you hear from the candidates? Was there any clarification? Was there any new news? Was there specifics on policies?
There wasn't. It was more of, I sort of felt like it was a bit of a slugfest and a lot of sort of, you know, if you didn't like my donations from, you know, you can give it back and I'll give you the address. I think that was a moment that stuck out. I keep waiting to hear specifics about what the mayor of Chicago is going to do when she takes office and finds a huge amount of red ink just sitting on her desk. The city has basically $1 billion it's going to need to come up with in pensions over the next couple of years. There is a new teacher's contract that needs to be negotiated, and not to mention the police union and the firefighters are also looking for new deals. Those are big problems, and we didn't hear any specifics about that.
And Alden Laurie, I don't think it was for a lack of trying on the part of Phil Ponce, but as Heather's pointing out, there are some very big issues confronting one of these candidates come May 20th. Do you think voters are focused on that at this point, or are they looking for some other quality in these two women that they're going to vote for?
Well, voters often aren't thinking about some of those really big things where you have to really have a deep understanding of what's happening in the weeds. And so the financial stuff, I think these candidates can get by not addressing very much. It may not hurt them a whole lot. But one thing that those issues do relate to regular people on is what people spend in terms of tickets, the cars getting towed, water rates. There are a number of ways the city has kind of used these nickel and dime antics in order to kind of get some of the money that it needs for some of those bigger picture issues. And those are things that people really feel, and the candidates haven't really talked about how reform might happen on some of those measures. So those are the kinds of things I think voters, those very tangible issues are the things that they're going to be looking for. From
Steve Daniels, your publication, your media outlet, did a supported Bill Daley in the first go-round because he was so pro-business, or that was the justification. You're a business publication. Will the Crains be making any kind of endorsement this time around? If so, for whom? And are there concerns about the financial aspect and policies of these two candidates?
Yeah, I do think Crains will be in, and of course I can't disclose. I actually don't. We haven't even decided. But
they do ask for your input. Is that correct?
They do.
Okay.
And I think that yes. I mean, there's very great concern about the financial aspect, that the lack of addressing that, not just with Crains, but with a lot of other publications as well. And I think to your point, these candidates clearly are not going to be addressing that before voters cast their ballots. There's no upside for them to do so, and they're not being penalized in any way, shape, or form for not addressing it, other than getting chided by the media. So, yeah, it's
Well, there are 4 more forums next week, back to back. It's going to be a forum
got their
palooza,
opportunities, right? But
and hopefully they will be pressed to answer.
I think they've been pressed. You know, I think Phil Ponce did it last night too, and they skirt it and say, well, I got to look at it, and you know, and they can keep doing that until the vote occurs, and I'm sure that they will. I have little doubt of that. But in terms of the business community, that clearly, in terms of dollars, contributions, is with Lightfoot. I mean, there's just no question about it. So if you look at the 2 big contributions from 2 big Madison Dearborn co-founders, John Canning and another man whose name I forgot, but who also gave her $100,000, and a whole slew of others. Laura Ricketts gave her $50,000. A number of business figures. There's absolutely no question but that the business community is pro-Lightfoot in this runoff.
So, Brandon Pope, this barrage of endorsements that are coming for each candidate, some from unions, some from community groups, some from elected officials. But this week, Chance the Rapper backed Tony Preckwinkle. And Willie Wilson, of course, has already backed Lori Lightfoot. Does this resonate in the community, especially in the African American community?
Yeah, I think with Willie Wilson, I think it definitely is sort of seen as a kingmaker in a sense for the black community. Neither of these candidates did well getting the black vote when it comes to the South and West sides, which is kind of surprising. You got 2 black women there. Willie Wilson got a big share of that. So kind of what he says tends to sway a lot of people in that regard. As far as Chance the Rapper, I think the verdict is still out on what his impact really is.
Well, it didn't have much impact on Amara Enya and his backing and his financial backing.
But you could argue she probably did better with him than she probably would have done without him as well. A little surprising to see him go for Tony Preckwinkle, but his dad's connections there, it kind of makes sense. But will it have a factor? It might be too late, honestly. He also said he's not giving any money towards Tony Preckwinkle. Didn't even have her there with him.
He says he doesn't have any money left to give, and of course he's a multi-millionaire at this point. But he did just get married, and he's expecting his 2nd child so soon. But so maybe he has other financial obligations. But Alden, Lori, getting back to the African American community, as Brandon points out, the vast majority voted for other candidates, including Willie Wilson. Are the candidates successfully rallying the African American community, and if so, in what ways, and what do you think will happen there?
I would say no. I was just listening to Black Talk Radio. There is a lot of undecidedness, and particularly black voters are wanting to know, how are these candidates going to impact their communities, specifically the South and West sides? What will you do for us? And I don't think either candidate has really jumped on that bandwagon and addressed those concerns. One thing I will say, though, is that Tony Preckwinkle, I think, may have a little bit of an upper hand. She's more of a known commodity than Lori Lightfoot, and some of Lightfoot's connections to the Chicago Police Department, I think some folks, including folks who are big supporters of Chance the Rapper and following him, they have real strong concerns about Lori Lightfoot for those reasons. So there's still a lot of time to do what they need to do, but I don't think they've really tapped that chord yet, and that we could, as a result, see lower turnout from those wards.
And that's exactly what Tony Preckwinkle said on the forum here last night, that she thinks the turnout is going to be low. Do you agree? Do you think there's
well, you know, when I look at what Chance
such a lack of interest?
Well, when I look at Chance the Rapper jumping in, I would think that would mean more millennials might actually add their input into this, and younger voters. And when you take that into consideration, and the way the activist community is kind of rallying around what Chance says, and almost you're seeing this, you know, shift almost as the activists are kind of going after Lori Lightfoot's record as a prosecutor. Maybe you see more show up in this runoff election than you did actually happening when you had all those candidates there. Maybe that creates some sort of impact that we're not accounting for, and could help Preckwinkle big time.
Heather, is Mayor Emanuel going to clean up a lot of things before he leaves office, or leave it to his successor, not only in terms of the controversies over Lincoln Yards and that police and fire academy on the west side, but then there are contracts coming up. one of them, a big one, is going to be the Chicago Teachers Union. Will he make any headway before he leaves office?
He will not. Those will be also waiting for the next mayor on her desk when she takes office. What I do expect the council to do before he leaves office is to take a vote on the Lincoln Yards $900 million transportation reimbursement TIF. That could come next on April 10th, just after the election, so no rest for us weary reporters. He's also going to try to change the city's Divvy bike sharing program that would basically allow Lyft to operate the program in return for an investment on the south and the west sides to bring the bikes to all of the wards, he said. So those seem to be the two sort of things he's trying to get through in this last full council meeting that he'll preside over. Something that won't happen, Elon Musk's Hyperloop tunnel to O'Hare to downtown, that is dead. And the other thing that I don't think we'll see happen, although he could surprise me, it wouldn't be the first time, is the $10 billion pension obligation bond that the mayor wants the city council to lay the groundwork for, in terms that would need a final vote after the new mayor takes office.
And that could potentially ease the burden on the next mayor, but you don't think that that's going to happen at this point?
So it's very controversial because it basically is a bet that they'll be able to borrow money more for basically pay less for money now than it'll cost them in the future. I don't know that there's a whole lot of appetite to make that, that sort of wager when so much of the economy seems to be sort of at least in transition.
Any of you think there's going to be any surprises, or what are you anticipating in this final week of the campaign before the runoff election? Besides all the forums that are coming up and
well, I think Lori Lightfoot is going to have to sort of more robustly address her sort of history on the police board and how she would handle sort of police reform and relations with the community.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Lori Lightfoot is in a make no mistakes position. She's got it would appear a clear lead. She's got. We didn't even talk about Toni Preckwinkle going off the air with her ads. Yeah. That was the context in which she talked about low turnout. So when she was pressed about how can you take your ads off the air 11 days before an election, she said, effectively, when pressed the third time on it, said, well, this is going to be a low turnout election, so what's the point in spending all the money on advertising? She didn't say it in those words, but that was the message. That's an odd thing for somebody to say who's trying to get people excited about her.
But there's also questions about how much money she has left, isn't there?
Well, obviously, and she didn't address that, and that's probably the real reason why she's off the air. But nonetheless, to have that be your message was odd.
Also hurting her, the Obamas not adding their voice to this conversation.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're sticking this one out?
They've got a political stake here. They have the Obama Presidential Center, and whoever is mayor, they got to deal with the red tape when it comes to that with that mayor. So if they go for Preckwinkle, and Lightfoot wins, as polls are showing will probably happen, that's not going to look too good. They're probably going to have a new relationship they have to build there, and it's probably going to stifle things a bit when they try to do that.
They do have a big stake in this election.
They do.
All right, let's get to some of the other headlines of the week. Even more Illinois Catholic priests are named in a new report issued by lawyers of sexual abuse victims. Chicago's police union blasts the oversight board, COPA, saying it isn't qualified to investigate officer-involved fatal shootings. And the state's highest court says no to a resentencing of former Chicago cop Jason Van Dyke, serving a nearly 7-year prison term for the murder of Laquan McDonald. So let's begin with this lawsuit filed by the FOP, because this isn't the first time that they've challenged a police investigatory body. The last time was IPRA, and they lost on that one. Alden Lowry, do you think that this is going to be any different?
I don't think so. I mean, the police department, particularly the union, has kind of taken a hard line on these shootings for a very long time. And I think the pendulum has swung a little bit on this, not to the degree that people are kind of outwardly bashing the department or overly critical of the department, but I think it has been firmly cemented that these shootings are highly questionable, and when police are, at least questions are raised about whether they've acted appropriately or not, I think it's clear that that's a question that we should take honestly and seriously. So I don't see this going anywhere in terms, but the union, like I said, is really stuck to their guns and pushed for their officers for a while.
The rationale for their suit is that they say that, according to state law, fatal shootings need to be investigated by state-qualified law enforcement officers. A Cook County judge, like I mentioned last time around, said throughout the lawsuit that's essentially stated the same thing. But does this give some sort of signal, again, harking back to whoever's the new mayor, of just how much resistance the FOP is going to put up to change, especially as the consent decree, Heather Cherone, is now in effect?
Absolutely. So not only is the consent decree now in place and will significantly tie the hands of the next mayor in terms of whatever changes she wants to make in terms of police accountability, there's also a move on the city council to change the way police are basically overseen and to establish a civilian review board. There are two different versions that have sort of been, lingering out there for months. One would basically sort of give the civilian review board the chance to hire and fire both the head of COPA and the police superintendent. Another version would have less sort of direct control. The next mayor will have to decide where she wants to go with that. Mayor Emanuel has sort of put the kibosh on it for the last several months.
And how do you think right now the two candidates stand on that? Because, of course, Lori Lightfoot was the driving force behind the task force that reviewed the police after the Laquan McDonald tape came out. So what do you think, if Lori Lightfoot is the next mayor, is going to be the outcome of this?
I think she's delivered a nuanced message on this. She's said, I've got bona fides in terms of my history in toughening up investigation of police misconduct, and she does, there's no question. But by the same token, she has also signaled support for the police department and police officers. I think Tony Preckwinkle's message has been much more the police need to be reined in. So I do think there's a difference and a distinction there where we haven't seen a lot in some other areas of policy.
Let me ask about this decision by the Illinois State Supreme Court that Jason Van Dyke will not be resentenced, that Judge Vincent Gaughan's ruling will stand less than 7 years behind bars. Brandon Pope, was that a surprise to you?
It wasn't a surprise that, it's a very rare review. It was kind of a Hail Mary shot in a sense, and the chances of anything happening from there, it usually doesn't happen. So that wasn't surprising. Not seeing a rationale from the court about that was interesting. And I can understand why they didn't. Maybe they just don't want to weigh in. They just don't feel a need to add a perspective there. But to see Kwame Raoul make this push was good for, I think, his political base and for his chances and kind of what he ran on when he tried to get to be Attorney General.
And I have to ask your thoughts about this Anderson report, so-called Anderson report that came out this week that lists even more clergy and lay people as abusers, alleged abusers, and the Catholic Church, the archdiocese, 6 archdioceses in Illinois say that these really aren't new names and that some of them are unsubstantiated. Is this just an ongoing problem for the Catholic Church, or victims just feeling more comfortable coming forward? What do you think, Alden Laurie?
I mean, I think it's both. I mean, this is the issue for the leadership of the Catholic Church, and may be for the foreseeable future. We haven't even gotten to talk about the aftermath of people who suffered this kind of abuse, and how the church may be liable for that. So there's a bigger question out there. In terms of the reach of this and the severity of it, literally the legitimacy of the church is at stake around this scandal. So the church, at least locally here, has tried to be very forthcoming. They've been proactive in many ways, but there's still a lot apparently that hasn't been shared with the public.
All right, let's move on to some business headlines. Problems mounting for Chicago-based Boeing as the U.S. Department of Justice steps up its investigation of the 737 MAX jets, which were involved in fatal crashes. State legislators move a big step closer to approving a controversial ComEd rate hike plan, and another bill introduced in the state Senate would double the state gas tax and raise vehicle registration fees to fund the state's deteriorating road and bridge infrastructure. There is some new news, Steve Daniels, about the 737 MAX and Boeing, and that is that an Indonesian airline today canceled a $5 billion order for 50 planes. We have the DOJ investigating. We have this New York Times report that there are 2 features that Boeing did not include with the plane. They were extras that had to be purchased. How much worse is this for Boeing, and what's going to happen at the company in the same week that we're told that its CEO got a hefty raise of about 22, $23 million.
Yeah. This is got to be the most severe crisis for Boeing in decades. I mean, I certainly don't. I can't recall something worse than this. Yeah, the order, I mean, I'm sure we're going to see more of that, canceled orders. The financial aspects of this are the least of it, really. This is reputational. And we're talking about a company, when you talk about American engineering and American ingenuity, Boeing is about the first name you're going to think of. There are 2 big aircraft manufacturers in the world, so it's not as if people have lots and lots to choose from. That's in Boeing's favor, that there aren't
Airbus
3 or 4, Airbus being the other one. And you know, it's manufacturing a plane obviously takes time and expense and money and planning. So to some respect, that buys Boeing some time to fix all of this.
What do you think the company has to do at this point, and certainly giving its CEO a hefty raise of that amount in the middle of this crisis? Maybe isn't the best plan.
I thought that was a very bad plan. Now, obviously, a lot of that presumably was decided before this really blew up into the scandal that it is today. But the first crash that called into question all of this took place in 2018. At the very least, that could have easily been accounted for by the board in determining his pay package and saying this is a potential problem, despite the really great financials that the company had last year that are typically the way you assess.
We have to move on, but you've written a lot about utility rates, and ComEd is the latest, and there's this controversial plan that's tied to interest rates involving ComEd. Quickly tell us about that.
Yeah, ComEd, currently their rates are set by a formula that basically the regulators have next to no say about how their rates are set. That formula is set to expire in 2022. ComEd wants to extend it for 10 years. It's perceived by critics as a blank check for the utility. And the part that I wrote about it is that the amount that they make, the profit they make, is tied to interest rates. So essentially they're asking ratepayers to make a 13-year bet on what interest rates do, unhedged, unprotected, which no bank or investor would ever do if they had a choice.
And does that have a chance of becoming law? This was just a committee that passed this at this point.
It does, absolutely. Anytime ComEd wants something badly enough in Springfield, it has a chance to become a law. I think that it's tied to some other energy things that are moved, so it probably won't move on its own, but I wouldn't even bet against that.
How many of you are willing to pay 19 cents a gallon more per gas to fix our roads and bridges in the state?
That's a tough sell for a lot of people. I mean, that hits right at the pocketbook. Many people commuting, and it's already tough to drive in Chicago anyway. You're using a lot of gas sitting on that interstate, right? So to have to spend more money per gallon on that, it can hurt a lot of families.
Is this the equivalent of the soda tax?
So the issue is, of course, is that there hasn't been a raise in the gas tax for several decades, and there's no doubt that the state's infrastructure is crumbling. So how do you pay for it? Well, you can make an argument that the fairest way to do that is to tax the people who are using the infrastructure. However, you're not wrong. A hike in the gas tax is one of the most regressive taxes that the state could enact.
We're going to return to this in our web extra video because we have so much to talk about. But let's move on to sports because spring is officially here. The Cubs and Sox open the season on the road next week. How do they look? After missing their shot at a Stanley Cup last year, the Blackhawks are hanging on to playoff hopes with less than 10 regular season games left. And a report says former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick and current Carolina Panther player Eric Reid settled their collusion grievance with the NFL for a stunningly low figure by NFL standards. So, Brandon Pope, what's your outlook for the Cubs and Sox as they open the season next week, finally?
Finally. I'm just so excited. We're getting warm weather, right? Get to sit back, grab a beer. So you got two teams here with different storylines. The Cubs trying to get back in contention for a World Series. We've seen them have some roster losses. We've seen them with some additions. They just want to get back to winning a World Series. The Sox just want to get away from the rebuild phase and be a competing team overall. They believe they can do that this year. They just signed Eloy Jimenez to a large contract, securing him as their face for the future. Yeah, very good. So they want him to be around for a while. They want him to be the future of the franchise. We were wondering where the direction was for the Sox for a long time. It looks like we finally might have some clarity that they want to actually do some things and actually win some titles, compete for some division spots too.
We have a lot of sports teams trying to rebuild in this town, don't we?
It seems that way. The Bulls having a tough time.
So the Blackhawks, we were talking throughout the season, what do they need to rebuild? But here they are, maybe on the verge of getting into the playoffs?
That second spot is still up for grabs, surprisingly.
Yeah.
They have to win this weekend to even be in the conversation. The team they're playing this weekend currently has that second spot. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can actually secure that. But they are in a position they didn't expect to be in for sure, and they don't want to be in again.
We're almost out of time, so let me just say goodbye, and my thanks to Steve Daniels, Heather Sharon, Alden Lowry, and Brandon Pope. And we're going to continue this conversation that we've started, including getting back to some issues involving our finances in our Web Extra video. But for tonight, I am Eddie Aruza, and I thank you for watching us, and we'll see you on the next Week in Review. Good night. Colin Kaepernick. So the Wall Street Journal is reporting that what he settled for, along with Eric Reed, was less than $10 million, which is, of course, petty change when it comes to the NFL. Were you surprised? If this is true, and they say that sources are acknowledging that it is, are you surprised by that figure?
I think it's stunning. It's less than what rookie quarterbacks make. They make $20 million. The two of them making less than $10 million in combined. I think that's shocking for both sides of the argument. The NFL doling out that little money, and then those two taking that little money in that settlement.
Do you believe that they had no choice in this?
My guess is there might be a second leg to this, that Kaepernick will be allowed back into the league, and that was part of, perhaps that we'll find out about that down the line. I don't think this is the only concession.
Well, there are reports that maybe this is just one factor in, or one element of what they've agreed to, and that there might be more down the line. But still, does it seem like the NFL is getting off easy in this collusion settlement?
I mean, $134 million for Monday Night Football. They have the money, you would think.
Yeah,
so.
$10 million is a rounding error for them. That's that's a check to make this go away kind of thing.
Even beyond the financial penalty.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, proud sponsors of the Chicago Bar Foundation's Investing in Justice campaign that supports pro bono and legal aid organizations for the needy throughout the Chicago area.